Hello, it's the Great Canadian Bagel here, coming to you with the second last update to the Ontario provincial election forecast series for 2022 election. I will note I am going to do a final projection on Wednesday of this week, or June 1st, if you're watching this in the future. And this update will be the final forecast for the election, the June 1st one. This one is just the regular Sunday update. And here we go. So, a couple things just to note about the model here. I have now added all of the ridings that people are running candidates in, and updated which incumbents are not running. That was mostly updated. There's a few things I hadn't added because they dropped out just the start of the race, and I forgot to update them. So between that and between the polling swing right now, last week, there's been a lot of change in the model, a lot of movement made. Generally speaking, right now, this is a general overview of the campaign before I get into anything specific. The Liberals are objectively losing ground in the polls. They have lost about a 1.2 percentage points in the last week. The NDP are about flat. The Greens have shot up quite a bit. And I suspect if the momentum they currently have continues, my model might be underestimating them. And I know 338 Canada in particular has been forecasting Parry Sound here, which my cursor is pointing at, as relatively close, with the Greens potentially winning the seat. My model currently doesn't project that, but I will note the reason why 338 Canada's model projects that is because his model does consider riding level polls, and there were riding level polls that were showing the race in Parry Sound to be really close. My model doesn't consider riding level polls, mostly because it would greatly increase the amount of work I would have to do to add that in. And at this point in time, I do not have the man hours to overhaul the model to consider riding level polls. And on top of that, almost all the time, the riding level polls are not very useful or informative. In the case of Parry Sound, it is very likely that if the Liberals were running a candidate there, because they are not, the Greens wouldn't be doing as well. And it wouldn't be a case where the Greens are contesting the Conservatives, Progressive Conservatives, so, well, is what it is. For the record, my model does have the Greens in second place right now there, but I expect I will be missing that riding, or I'll have a large miss in that riding if the riding level data is to go by, just because my model doesn't handle it very well. Other things worth noting, the Progressive Conservatives overall have rebounded this week. I suspect the reason for that is just after the debates, people were a bit ambivalent to Doug Ford's performance because everything I've seen on them, he didn't do amazing, he didn't do poor, so I suspect he kind of left the debates with a slight dent, but as that has worn off, he's rebounded a little bit and he's back to about the 39% that he's been getting for most of my polling, or my modeling, which is only down about 1.5 percentage points from 2018, which is not that significant of a difference, whereas his two major opposition parties, the Liberals and the NDP, are extremely heavily splitting the vote. The NDP turn have lost about 11 percentage points. The Liberals are technically up about 5. But, well, there is a net loss between the Greens, Liberals, and NDP of about 5 or 6 percentage points, depending on rounding. In fact, actually, I could pull this up right here, and we could count. So right here, this is the 2018 results. 1 decimal place per area. And you will note these areas were by my own definitions. So here we have the Liberals, the Liberals, NDP, and Greens collectively got about 57.7. And with the current projection, they're forecast collectively at 53.8. So actually, I was slightly wrong. It's about 4 percentage points. So the left opposition is down about 4 percentage points. Doug Ford himself down about 1.5. And that is almost entirely gone to the Ontario and New Blues. The relative size of these two, the ordering of the Ontario to New Blues is pretty solid. The exact magnitude of each is a bit in flux because there are polls that do pull them. Like Leisure polls both of them separately, but a lot of the polling companies like Main Street or Angus Reid or Abacus, some of the better polling companies in Canada, just group them in as other. So that is a difficulty with this projection. So I suspect I will also see a lot of error here, just because there is not as much firm data. But by every measure that I've seen, it's reasonable that these two parties will get a non-negligible vote share. It is unlikely either will get seats, though. Though, again, it is worth noting that I believe it's this riding here and this riding here are Jim and Belinda Carriolos. I could be slightly wrong. So I would not entirely be surprised if either of those ended up staying, because Belinda... Is it Belinda? Regardless, I can't think of her name. She is an incumbent MP, so that is always an advantage, and there is cases of incumbent MPs that no one expects to win actually pulling out a win. I've not seen any riding level polling from her riding, so I don't know her relative strength. So without that, we don't really know. So it is not impossible, but I think it's unlikely. There is also an incumbent Ontario Party MP. I don't suspect he's going to win. Just the Ontario Party's vote share is even lower in every single poll than New Blues. So I just suspect that he's going to have an even harder time holding his seat. One other potential wild card is in this riding, which is... I can't think of the name of it. Is it this riding? Let me double check here. The riding specifically I'm referring to is the one that Derek Sloan is running in. Oh, I apologize. That is this guy here. This riding. This one is a potential wild card because Sloan is relatively well known and he is running in this riding. And so it is he has a potential chance of pulling out a surprise win. I do not expect him to be able to do that, but unlike a lot of the candidates for the Ontario Party or a lot of the candidates for the New Blue Party, the case of either Carriolos or Sloan himself, they are significantly more notable than them and have represented the areas they've been running in before, either as a provincial MP or a federal MP. So they do have history in the riding. So it is not inconceivable that they could pull a win. It's just, I suspect, unlikely. So overall, here, the race really is showing that Doug Ford has done a good job managing his left and right flank, what is likely, or what seems to have happened, is Ford has pivoted to the center a little. Some people argue he's pivoted quite a bit. As someone not from Ontario, it's a little less clear to me how much he's moved, just because I do not have the same level of knowledge and oversight of his exact policies and exactly what he's done. But it is safe to say he has moved a little to the left, or a lot to the left, somewhere in that regard. He's moved to the left, you could say. Whether he's still... my feeling is he's still best classified as right-wing, but if on a scale of like right-wing politics, with 10 being the most right you could be in Canada, and 1 being you're effectively centrist, my gut feeling is you went from about a 4 to maybe a 2. My Ontario viewers who might know more, feel free to comment below and discuss this if my assessment seems to be off. But that's where it feels to me. This movement, though, seems to have really made it hard for his opposition parties, the Liberals and the NDP, to really do anything in the campaign. Combined with Horwath seems to be progressively unpopular. Her approval numbers are not very different in recent polling than Doug Ford, which is not normal for an NDP leader. Typically they have higher approval ratings, though I suspect a lot of, like Singh's, for example, high approval ratings I don't think are because people actually like Singh. I suspect a lot of that is people don't take him too seriously, so they like his sentiment, but they don't actually analyze him very deep. But if he was actually a serious contender and they were looking into him more, taking him more seriously, his approval numbers would probably drop. So in a way, he gets benefit from being or basically a non-factor. So people only hear his sentiment and they don't actually look into his policies. Horwath, though, since she technically is a factor and the NDP can technically win, is considered more serious, and she has pretty bad approval ratings as a result. Which is surprising, but not unexpected. And really, I don't think she's going to stay on as leader after this. I think there's no way you could pitch to your party that after losing 20 seats, after contesting 4 elections, and moving into 3rd place in popular vote from 2nd, that you should stay on as leader. I also very much suspect that Del Duca is likely also going to get removed as leader as a result of this election. He's had a very unsatisfactory result to a lot of Liberals that I've seen. There's a lot of discussion already of him getting turfed, which kind of underpins his campaign, but it is what it is. I also personally think it's a bit unfair. I think there was too much expectations placed on the man when you're coming from 3rd place with 7 seats, gaining 9 seats and 5 percentage points of vote share does seem like a reasonable degree of success. At the same time, I also disagree with people federally removing Scheer because he also gained vote share and gained seats. It just seems out of whack to remove a leader who objectively did better than the last one. But it looks like his career as leader is also probably dead with this election. There's no path for him for victory at this point. We look at the regionals here, down here, and let me just zoom in a little bit. Zoom in a bit more. There we go. We look at this, like, Northern Ontario, the Liberals are doing terrible. They're doing pretty bad in the East, considering Ottawa is included in the East. That's not particularly satisfying numbers. Doing irrelevant in the GTA. Decent numbers at 27.8%, but it's so dilute that they're not going to win a single seat. Doing pretty poor in Hamilton, Niagara. Terrible in the South. And they're doing good in Toronto, which really shouldn't be saying much because Liberals like the NDP, are very much the party of the very urban population of Canada. So them doing bad in those areas would be more shocking than not. Horwath, as well, just doing terrible on the East, doing terrible on the general GTA, doing pretty bad in Toronto as well. The NDP scoring appreciably behind the Progressive Conservatives in Toronto is not great news for them, especially if you look at 2018 when they scored more than both. The Liberals and the Conservatives, so that is a big hit. They also lost a ton of ground in Hamilton, going from a narrow first place to a distant second, and again lost a lot of ground in Northern Ontario. Now, at the moment, it looks like the NDP will be very narrowly holding all of their ridings in Northern Ontario, and they might pick up this one right here from the Liberals. I guess technically, actually, this is an incumbent NDP seat, but they might hold it from the Liberals, I should say. But, that all said, it is very likely the NDP... it is not implausible the NDP could lose this riding here. I can't think of the name of it, or Timmins itself, though it's moving away from the Progressive Conservatives. They're starting to do a little worse in the North by polling, so this might not be happening. I can't really think of the mechanism why there was a big shift this campaign. Early in the campaign, Northern Ontario was swinging heavily towards the Progressive Conservatives and away from the NDP. They've kind of rescued it. I can't put my thumb on it, but maybe someone from Northern Ontario could put some their 2 cents in the comments on why that might be happening. But it doesn't really seem clear to me what mechanism that is. Maybe it's just people are so used to voting that way that if they're not super thrilled by Doug Ford, that's not going to be changed by it. Who knows? So generally speaking, this campaign is likely going to see a lot of decimation of leaders. Mike Schreiner is likely going to keep his leadership as long as he wins a seat in Guelph, especially if he picks up a seat in Parry Sound, Muskoka here. I don't think any reasonable person should ever expect a single person in the Greens to win a seat. So if they win a seat, that is to the credit of the leadership and particularly that local person. The local candidate had to do a really good campaign to really win a seat at the Greens because they're just such a distant choice. The big riddle with this election is not anything to do with the Greens, Progressive Conservatives, NDP, or Liberals here. It's to do with the New Blues and the Ontario Party. So currently, they're not on the scoreboard here because they're not even close to winning a seat. And they're distant in any seat that I've seen them in. Again, I don't have riding level polling, so that might not strictly be true. But it seems like right now that they're just distant in every single place. With a few exceptions, but pretty much generally true. So what's the way to phrase this? The big question here, do these parties disintegrate? Or do they stay around? And if they stay around, do they gain steam? Specifically, we're looking at the New Blues here, because they seem to be getting more media attention, they seem to be getting more donations as far as I can tell, and they seem to be running higher in the polls. Will they have the energy and the momentum to stay and contest 2026? Because it looks like Ford's going to win a comfortable majority here. And if they do stay, will they behave like the PPC federally, where they are effectively irrelevant? Some people argue they're costing the federal Conservatives some seats, but realistically, based on the demographics of the people going to the People's Party, I don't really think they are, because a lot of them are coming from the Greens, a lot of them are coming from Liberals, and a lot of them are coming from non-voters. Or, sorry, not the Liberals, the NDP. And a lot of them are coming from non-voters. So, the People's Party, that is. So it's not clear to me federally that the People's Party not running would actually increase the Conservative vote share that much. Whereas in Ontario, provincially, it could very well be the case that the New Blues are directly competing with Progressive Conservatives for seats, which I guess right now doesn't matter, or for vote share, that is. But it is conceivable that this could hurt the Progressive Conservatives in the future. Now, what could this mean? Well, since Canada uses a first-past-the-post system, there's only two possibilities for a third party. Either they push the mainstream party to adopt their positions, or they eclipse the mainstream party. The mainstream party, that is. So that is to say, the New Blues, since they seem to be the most credible of the new splinter parties, will either force the Progressive Conservatives to move back to the right, or else lose vote share and possibly the election to them, or they will eventually eclipse the Progressive Conservatives over a couple elections by cannibalizing their right wing. It currently doesn't look like that, but where I see the New Blues potentially having success if they continue existing as a party is if Doug Ford, or not if, when Doug Ford eventually loses or resigns and the Progressive Conservatives lose the next election. Because in that particular election, it is very possible that the backlash from the right might not like it, or the rebound in the following election, the New Blues could come up as a outside. That is a possibility. Now, there's been a lot of small right-wing parties pop up in historically Ontario. The last cycle had the Trillium Party. It went nowhere, so I don't really expect these parties to do anything. Maybe they will have some impact, but with the current state of politics, it's really difficult for them to have an impact because the Liberals and the NDP are so heavily splitting vote share that there is no conceivable path to victory for either of them. Until one of the Liberals or the NDP die as a party, or until the Progressive Conservatives just have a catastrophic run and people are just tired of them and want to get them out regardless, I don't see the Progressive Conservatives losing an election anytime soon. Now, a lot can happen in 4 years, by 2026, but barring Ford making big mistakes, or one of the Liberals or the NDP just electing a awful, horrendous leader, with the current state of politics in Ontario, I think Doug Ford is the default favorite to win 2026 right now. Yes, bold of me to claim this. This election's not even over, and I'm already expecting him to win the next one. Just on the state of the field, the opposition is so heavily split that I just do not conceive of a way for that to unite. So if we go back to here, the regionals, the reason for this is the Liberals do good in the East, specifically Ottawa, and the Franco-speaking parts of the East. the GTA and Toronto do awful everywhere else. So they do good with French-speaking Ontarians near Ottawa and urban areas, large urban areas. The NDP do good with, generally speaking, the north, Hamilton, Niagara area, the cities in the south, and to a lesser extent, downtown Toronto, like waterfront, the deepest, most densely populated part of Ontario. Toronto, like the heaviest ridings. Generally speaking, more union-focused areas. These are two very different, broad archetypes of voters. And this is the big problem. Again, I close this to not having a thing in the background. This is the big problem with the left in Ontario uniting constructively together. Because unionized working class voters and urbanite elitist voters, I'm gonna call it that. This is not to say everyone living in an urban area is elitist, but broadly speaking, from my personal experience, people living in cities tend to look down on everybody else. And the type of voter the Liberals do best with is the highly educated urbanite who tend to look down on everyone who doesn't have a university degree. So it's very difficult for those two factions to satisfy each other because they look down on each other. They don't like each other. They also have very different goals and views. Now, you could also say the same thing is true with progressive conservatives, with social conservatives and more socially moderate red Tories, just completely disagreeing on a lot of issues, and a lot of important issues, no matter what people consider. Politics isn't just about spending money, it is about morality, because, well, every single law that isn't spending money, even spending money, frankly, pretty much every single law is about morality of some kind or another. Even something as basic as, say, unemployment insurance is generally sold on morality grounds. Though, some people do sell it only on economic efficiency grounds. But normally people don't make that argument. They normally make the social safety net argument, which is a morality argument, not the economic efficiency argument, which is unemployment insurance allows someone to stay unemployed longer so they can find a better job that they're more productive at, which is the economic argument. This is not to say, because I don't want to get into discussion on this, that those are necessarily good or bad arguments, but those are the two main arguments for it. But unlike the left wing, in Canada at least, the right wing in Canada, specifically the very right wing in Canada, the more socially conservative members of Canada, right wing, are much more willing to swallow their pride in the name of winning than the left wing is. And generally speaking, this is true. No, there are pros and cons to this, especially if you are a social conservative, because generally speaking, that means none of your policies ever occur. So all that happens is you just stop the other person from implementing things. You don't actually do anything of your own. Pros and cons there. But it is the nature of, typically speaking, left-wing politics that they do splinter more. Because there is generally more broad disagreement and less willingness to swallow pride. This is not universal, truly true. It is just a general tendency. It does occur, though, or else, for example, in the US, you would not see the progressives supporting moderate Democrats. But they do on election day. But that is less common than the other way. Or that it's less common in a lot of places. most countries you will see more left-wing parties than you will see right-wing parties because of this. So what does all this say? Just to wrap this whole shebang right now. It looks like Doug Ford is going to walk away with a very comfortable majority, having a very uninteresting, boring election where at no point was he threatened. At the peak, I think the NDP were looking at maybe retaining 26 seats, which is a loss. The best point of the campaign was Doug Ford is going to gain 6 seats. His worst point that I recall. And with the state of politics in Ontario, unless there is significant consolidation among the left, or Doug Ford causes a major mistake, I do not see him losing anytime soon, because the way the party votes is splitted, he's in an unassailable position. There's 4 more years before the next election, but it seems, for now, Doug Ford will be the dominant force in Ontario. Well, that said, if you enjoyed the video, please like, share, subscribe, comment below what you thought. And again, I'd like to encourage my Ontario viewers to comment on anything that they've observed during the race, anything they've seen that they might think will, if they're writing to go one way or different than what my model's projecting. Anecdotal data like that isn't useful in model projection, but it is useful in understanding the data. And I'm always an advocate that people doing what I'm doing should get the anecdotal data, because it does help you understand and contextualize things. But with that said, I will bid you all adieu, and I will see you next time with something different.